Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf Tet Zion 16 of Masechet Avodah Zarah. We are four lines from the bottom of Tet Vav Amud Bet 15b. Let me share my screen and we will get started. So yesterday, we learned that Jews should not sell weapons to idolaters because we are concerned that they will use those weapons to kill Jews. And as a result, and that's of course a violation of the Torah. One of frankly, if they kill anybody, it's a violation. And the seller will therefore have violated lifnei iver before a blind person. You should not put a stumbling block. Now, of course, it does mean that literally, but we understand that that commandment says that effectively we can't do something that facilitates somebody else's doing something wrong. So now the question is, what about shields? And so let's pick up with again, fourth line from the bottom, and the Gemara quotes a brisa that regarding shields. So Tana Rabbanan, Ein mokrin lahen, we can't sell to them trisin, shields. V'yesh omrim mokrin lahen trisin. And there's another opinion that says we can sell to them shields. So my time, what's the reason for the people who say it's forbidden? And therefore, what's the implication of the reason for those who say it's permitted? So ilem mishum demagnu alayu. If you want to say that maybe the reason that it's going to be permitted is it's going to be prohibited is because it provides some level of protection, and we don't want to even protect idolaters. So then well, then we wouldn't be able to sell them anything. We can't sell them wheat and barley because wheat and barley is food that sustains them, that protects them as well. So Amar Rav. So here, this is Rav's statement is on some level somewhat troubling, but efshar, as we turn to Tet Zayin Amud Aleph, hachinami, that when if it's so Rashi says efshar below Ava, is given that it's impossible to do it without creating enmity. So, Hakinami, absolutely. Really, if you would, really, and the Masoros Hashah says, with respect to the word perish kamo im, meaning if it was possible. And we have other places in Shas where means im, if it was possible. So if it was possible to do it without creating enmity, well, then yes, actually, we shouldn't sell them anything else. But we have no choice to be in various kinds of businesses. And one of the businesses that, of course, Jews need to be in is provision of food. And we can't not sell to the significant population of idolaters, of people who are not God-fearing. And so as a result, we have no choice but to sell them food. But when it comes to shields, yeah, you could say, listen, this shield is not really for you. It's really more for Jewish people. You're not going to be effective, whatever. The people are not going to be as worked up about your failure to sell them a shield as other things. And so as a result, it's possible to implement this with respect to shields and say that we're not going to protect them. And but whereas the other position, whereas when it comes to food and things of that sort, we just can't do it. So that's one possible approach. That now there's another approach. Ika da Amri, Treason Hainu Taimadalo. Here's the reason that you can't use cell shields. Deki Shalim Zanaihu, when you finish up your weapons, Kotle begavaihu. Well, then you use your shield as a weapon. And so as a result, yes, it may be that shields generally protect, but so too, but they also can be used as a weapon. I think of many movies where they use a shield as a weapon. So, it's not, the Gemara was predicting that action. But yesh omrim, Mokra lahen trisin. And of course, there's the other opinion is that you can sell them shields. The kishlim zenaihu me'erik arki. And the reason that we say that you can sell it is because when they presumably finish with their weapons, they run away. They don't use their shields as a weapon. And so it's a debate as to what people do. And so as a result, that can be the basis for the two opinions, that in places where they might use the shield, or the nature of the shield is such that it might be used as an offensive weapon, well, then you shouldn't sell it to idolaters. But in a place where they would not use a shield as an offensive weapon, well, then you could sell it even to idolaters. Amarav Nachman Amarabba Baravua halacha ki yeshom. The halacha is like the yeshom, namely that it would be permitted. That it would be permitted. Okay, so that is the story with shields. Now, having addressed shields, so we covered weapons. Now we covered shields. What about raw metal? Especially given the fact that we expressed some level of concern with respect to using the shield as a weapon. What if you have raw metal? So Amar of Adabar Ahava, Ein Mocher Lahen Ashashios Shel Barzel. We're not going to sell them bricks of iron. My timer, why not? Mishum dechal sheminahu clay zion, because that's what you use. That's the main ingredient to create a weapon. Well, ihachi afilu mare v'chatzine nami. Well, then we shouldn't sell to them hoes and adzes. These are, various kinds of farming equipment, tools that can be used as weapons, because it's straightforward to use them as weapons. So Amarav Zid befarzela hindua. No, we're not talking about general metal. We're talking about a special kind of Hindi is India, Indian iron, as Rashi says. Bifarzula Hindaua. It's the first of the narrow lines in Rashi on the top of Het Zayin Amud Aleph. Now go to the second line. Shel Ere Hodu. It's from India. She'ain osin ota elolikli zayin. That's something that you would only use to make weapons. So the point is that if you have some kind of metal that is only likely to be used as weapons, so then that's what you cannot sell to an idolater. But when it comes to other metal objects, generally, yes, it's possible to use them as weapons, but it's not the predominant or main usage, and therefore you would not be prohibited to sell them that kind of metal. One second. What about today? Today, it seems the Gemara is speaking that we do sell this. So even though Rav Ada bar Ahava prohibited it at some earlier time, now if we look around, and this is something that we always must do with respect to halacha, is look around and see how the observance of halacha has developed in practice, and we see that people aren't actually doing this. So why not? So Amar of Ashi lefarsoi de magnu ilavan. No, we're selling it to Persians who are defending us. So we now have another justification. So first we say it's not all metal; it's only metal that is specifically designed for weapon usage. And when it comes to if we have a reason that we're going to sell it to those who are defending us, well, then we have a legitimate basis.
I think it's interesting you mentioned that in the context of everything that's happening with Iran. I believe during the Iraq-Iranian war, the United States was selling arms to Persia, Iran.
Could very well be.
And I think Israel too at that time was selling weapons and rifles.
Well, I'm not 100% sure, but the bottom line is the famous line of Menachem Begin is that he wished both sides well.
Yes.
So that was his famous line of Menachem Begin. All right. So okay. So
how do we know that the people won't turn against us? The people that are defending us now.
Excellent question. And the answer seems to be that we have to go based on our best information. And you're absolutely right. The interesting another corollary along those lines is, what about today? Are you allowed to open up a gun shop? This is one of the key Gemaras to discussing that question of whether or not a Jew should open up a gun shop. And who can they sell to? Because whereas selling to an average person on the street, that's not necessarily what it's referred to when we say le parsai de magnui lavan. Yeah, selling to the police force, selling to an army, that might be permitted because they're here to protect us. But selling it to some general person on the street, that's not necessarily clearly permitted. So in any event, best not to get into the gun shop business. Anyway, so now we go back to our Mishnah. And in our Mishnah, we said that you cannot sell large animals to idolaters. And the reason that we can't sell large animals to idolaters is because we're worried that either you will lease the animal, or you will lend the animal, or you will test the animal, and the result of any of those three actions will be your animal doing work on Shabbos. And that is prohibited because we are commanded to not only rest for ourselves, but to have our animals rest. And so as a result, and then the Tanakhama said, not only does that apply to adult animals that can work, but even young animals that are not yet able to work would also have it applied. And now we have a brisa, and then the Mishnah said that when it came to maimed animals, a maimed animal would also be prohibited, even though it can never do work. And so Rabbi Yehuda disagreed, and Rabbi Yehuda said, you know what? When it comes to a maimed animal, it is permitted. And so as a result, that was the debate that we had in the Mishnah, because according to Rabbi Yehuda, listen, this animal would never be able to do work on Shabbos. So as a result, that's why the rabbis didn't make a gezerah in that case. But when it came to other animals that can do work, even if they can do work in the future, when we're dealing with something that's maimed, and of course it's important to realize this, they did not have the veterinary skills that we have today to enable animals to get back into good health once they had broken a limb. They really would not be able to do anything. And so as a result, that's going to be the situation. So Tanya, so we have a brisa that explains Rabbi Yehuda's position. Rabbi Yehuda matir b'shvura. Rabbi Yehuda says that if in fact it has something that's broken and isn't going to fix, then it's going to be permitted to sell that animal. Because there's no way that it's going to be able to get better and live a healthy life. Now, there are different ways we can understand l'chayot in this context. It could mean, as I believe Tozos understands it, that it means effectively that the animal is a treifa, but the bottom and is going to die in the near future. But we could understand it very simply. In fact, let's take a look at Rashi. She'eni yachol lahitrapot umistama l'shchita zavna. And so, as a result, it's going to be ordinarily something. It's because it's broken and can't do work. What are you going to do with such an animal? You're going to slaughter it and eat it. V'lo mishmasha hele, and therefore it won't remain in the non-Jew's possession. V'lo chazi le Yisrael, and so as a result, bei ovid kochavim, and therefore a Jew isn't going to say, hey, wasn't that Bessie, the cow that belonged to Shlomo? And as a result, because I see that Bessie was sold to Chris, I'm going to go and sell my healthy animal to Chris as well, and that might be the outcome. I might think that I'm allowed to sell it if I see Bessie in their possession. The tepa korba mine, and so and as a result, I'll learn something that's wrong from it. And I'll think that I could sell to Chris a healthy cow. So as a result, we don't need to worry about that because Bessie's broken, and so Chris isn't going to keep Bessie around. He's going to slaughter her and eat her. And therefore, we can remember we saw yesterday, I believe, that if in fact there's a basis to say that the purchaser is likely to slaughter the animal, we would say that there was a justification to say that it was permitted. And so that may be what Rabbi Yehuda is saying in our Mishnah. So Amrulo, so they said the rabbi said to Rabbi Yehuda in disagreement, well, 1 second. What can we do with this animal? We can have some other animal impregnate it. And so as a result, yes, it might not be fit. It might not be fit for work, but maybe it could be used to produce more animals, and therefore you will keep it around, and therefore people could learn from it. And so that was the rabbi's concern. And the Kavan de Barmian Alev Yoledes. And once it has the possibility of giving birth, of having relations and giving birth, it will end up in the non-Jew's possession for an extended period of time, and therefore it will be some Jew is going to see Shlomo's cow Bessie in the possession of the idolater, and they're going to learn from it and think that they can sell their healthy animal. So Amar Lahen, so Rabbi Yehuda said back to them, let it give birth, meaning let's see it give birth. What he's really saying is, I realize I didn't underline this, Rashi, so pen. What he's really saying is that, take a look at Lekishetele, the Rashi, Ta'asuruhu Delo Tele La'olam. When it gives birth, then you can create your prohibition. But right now, there's no reason to prohibit because the answer is nothing happened and it's never gonna happen. According to Rabbi Yehuda, a maimed animal is not going to want to engage in relations with another animal, and therefore it's not going to be a problem. Alma lo mekabelet zachar, right? So we see from Rabbi Yehuda's position is that a maimed animal will never will not have relations. So that explains the two viewpoints in connection with a maimed animal. Ben Beseira mater basus. We then said that when it comes to Ben Beseira, he says that you can even sell a horse, and we saw in Rashi the explanation, because what happens with the horse is people ride it, and when people ride something, that is not considered carrying on Shabbos, because a live person is able to carry themselves, and we therefore say that even though riding a horse ends up being prohibited rabbinically, it's not going to be subject to the prohibition. So Tanya, we have a brisa that again goes into gradational details, and this is of course the source for Rashi on our Mishnah. Ben Beseira matir basus. Ben Beseira says it's permitted to sell a horse to an idolater because the work that is done with the horse is the kind of work that doesn't result in a sin offering. Okay, the Rebbe Oser. And Rebbe says that no, it's prohibited. Mibnei Shnei Dvarim. There are two reasons. Echad Mishum Torah's Klei Zayin. One is because a horse can be turned into a weapon, meaning if the horse is trained to stample and stampede over other enemies, so that's a weapon. The Echad Mishum Torah's Behemagasa. And also because of a large animal. Now, what exactly is meant by that large animal reference? The Gemara is going to ask that question right now. So, Bishlama Torah Kli Zion, I understand what you mean when you say you're worried about the horse being a weapon. Right? Oh, it can use its hooves to hit somebody. Ela Torah's behemagasa. But when we say that that there's the concern about it being a large animal, what exactly do you mean? Mahi, what is that? So Rabbi Yochanan l'kishiyazkin matchino b'rechayim b'Shabbos. Well, when it grows old, you'll put it on the millstone just like a donkey or any other animal. When he doesn't have the ability to jump about and do the fast movement that is actually useful, so fine, do it, let it do whatever small movements that it can do on the grindstone. So Rabbi Yochanan, halacha keben b'seira. And Rabbi Yochanan rules that the halacha is like ben b'seira, namely, you can sell the horse to idol worshippers. Okay, so that is that story. We now go to other cases of large livestock. And the question is, if you deal, the question that Gemara is going to deal with now is a fattened ox. Do we say that because the ox is ready to be eaten, it's nice and fat and juicy, and therefore nobody's going to buy it to have it work? We say, like we saw yesterday, Rav Huna say that if you know it's going to be sold for slaughter, you can sell it? Or do we say, no, you can thin it out and then put it to work? So let's take a look at that. Ibailu shor shel patam, a fattened ox, as Rashi tells us, it's one opposite the about 7th or 8th line up from the narrow lines. Shor shel patam shepitmo, that you fatten it up, v'shemein, and it's fat, me'od, very fat, ve'eno roy l'malacha, and so fat that it's not fit to do work with it, at least not at the moment. So tiboy l'Rebbe Yehuda, tiboy l'Rabbanan, and this question can be asked both to the Rebbe Yehuda, who says when it comes to a maimed animal that it's permitted, and to the rabbis, who say that when it comes to a maimed animal, it's prohibited, because there's an argument that you can make in each direction with respect to a fattened animal. Tibai Rebbe Yehuda, it's a question according to Rebbe Yehuda, ad kan lo kasharim Rebbe Yehuda ela b'shvura, that Rebbe Yehuda says that only when it's broken is it going to be permitted to sell. Delo asi l'chlam malacha, because it can never do work. Aval hai dekimasha hele. But here, if you keep it and let it thin out a little bit, asila klal malacha, it will be able to do work. So maybe asur, maybe we could say that it should be prohibited. Oh, Dilma, or alternatively, rather than saying that it's worse, it's a case that should be more strict than a maimed animal, we could argue that it's a case that should be less strict than a maimed animal. Why? Odilma afilu rabbanan, maybe even the rabbis would permit it. Lo ka asrei hasam ella lav destame lav shchitakai. They felt that when it came to the wounded animal, that the potential for it having children was sufficient for people to keep it around, and therefore it was not necessarily set up to be slaughtered and eaten. Aval hai, but this animal that's nice and fat and juicy and ready to be slaughtered right now, it is ready for slaughter immediately. Afilu rabbanan sharu, maybe even the rabbis would agree that it's permitted. So we're going to try to answer this, but we're not going to be successful. Okay, so Tashma, the Amar of Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, shall base Rebbe Hayu Makribin Shor shall Patam B'Yom Edam. That when in Rebbe's day, they would bring a fattened ox to the king. The Rashi tells us that Makrivin mas v'doron lamelech, a tax and a present for the king. So they would bring this beautiful fattened ox on the holidays of the pagan holidays, on the festival days, and so that's point number one. Now, what did they then do? Chiser arba rivavan. So Rebbe would then spend 40,000 of whatever, 40,000 of some coin, she'ein makriyin oso hayom, that they shouldn't have to bring it on the day of the festival. Because remember, on the day of the festival, you're not supposed to engage in business with an idol worshiper. Elalamachar, they want to bring it the next day. But the bottom line is we see that he's trying to get out of having to bring it. Chiser arba rivivan, and then he would spend another 40,000 she'ein makrivin osochai, so as not to bring the animal alive, that he'll bring a slaughtered animal. Then you don't have to worry about them trying to kill it for the sacrifice, because you don't have to worry about them about it at all, because it's already dead. Ella shachud, he wants to bring it slaughtered. And then Chisera bar Rivan, he spent another 40,000 she'ein makrivin oso kol ikar, that he wouldn't have to bring it at all. So in a couple of years, he was able to whittle down the tax, and he basically paid 120,000 shekel or whatever in order to get out of the obligation. It highlights how wealthy Rebbe was. We saw just a few days ago the conversations between Rebbe and what's his name? Oh, the Roman leader that highlighted how wealthy both of them were. I'm sorry that I'm just not good at remembering names. And in any event, the point is that Rebbe was very, very wealthy. Having all kinds of produce on his table at every season. So my timer. So now, how's this a proof one way or the other about selling a fattened ox to an idolater generally? So lav mishum dilma asi l'shahuye. Isn't it the concern that Rebbe had about it hanging around, and that's why he was trying to get out of it? Well, 1 second, according to your reasoning, if he was worried about it hanging around, she'ein makrivin oso ayom el lamachar, my timer. Why would he try to move it from the day of the holiday to the next day? That doesn't necessarily do anything. It's going to remain around. The concern applies on both days. So Ella Rebbe mi'akar milsabai. No, though the point is that he was trying to slowly and surely uproot the entire tax. The savar ye'aker v'asi porta porta. And sometimes, if somebody is forcing you to do something that is not a good Torah action, it's better to, do a little bit today and get rid of a little bit, and do a little bit tomorrow and get rid of a little bit. And finally, on the third day, you'll get rid of the whole thing. So sometimes you got to make progress one step in front of the other. So as a result, we don't have a proof. But 1 second, how do you know that anybody would ever kind of keep this fattened ox alive? Barya v'avid malacha, are you sure that if it gets healthy again, it can do work? Maybe really this fattened animal is exactly like a maimed animal. So Rav Ashi says, no, I have experience that says that this animal's not like it. Because Rizvida told me, Bar Torah Mashahinanlai, that he once had an ox like this that he kept around and waited. V'avid al chad train. And that ox, well, because it was fattened and then made healthy again, it was twice as effective and did twice the work of other oxen. And so as a result, that shows that actually we do need to be worried about the sale of such an ox, and that maybe it will be kept around. Okay, so ein mokran lahen dubin va'araya. So now the next Mishnah continues our listing of items that should not be sold to idolaters, and says you can't sell them bears and lions. This is one of the most, again, this is a key Gemara in connection with the idea of saying that we don't want to get involved with non-Jews with respect to weapons and things that could cause injury. So the chol davar sheyesh bo nezek l'rabim, anything that could cause harm to the public, you are not supposed to be selling it. And ein bonim imahim basilki, and we're not going to build a basilica. Rashi, let's go into the Rashi, because Rashi will tell us what each of these items are. So the first Rashi on the Mishnah, basiliki. We'll skip down 2 lines. Basilike gedola haisa. It was this large structure. V'sham danim b'nei adam umepilin oto umeit. And they would judge people and throw people out of the building from a high floor and cause them to die. And so that's why they wouldn't allow the build. You're not allowed to help a non-Jew, an idolater, build a basilica. Second, Gardom, Rashi tells us, Binyan Echad, it's a one-story building, who ladun nefashos, in order to judge judgment, and so as a result, it's a court building, or a court building with several structures on it. So that's the next item, and again, it facilitates them potentially putting people to death. The next item is Itztadja, a stadium, and there, Makom, Rashi tells us, Makom she'osin sham itztudanut, it's where they do stadium things in it. Sure, where they set up an ox, kamo shor ha'itzdadin, an ox for the stadium. Minagach, and it gores, v'horig anashim, and it kills people. V'uschoku lahem, and it's a party for them. Meaning this is the
gladiators, the gladiators.
Exactly, the gladiators. It's on some level, it's bullfighting, right?
Yeah.
Is what specifically is being referred to here. But of course, any kind of action like this would also be prohibited. And bima is a platform. Now, of course, we have a bima in the center of our synagogues. Nami ke'ein migdal. Again, it's some kind of structure. Katsarhu, it's not so big, or narrow, it's narrow, vigavoa, and tall. And then we continue on, Kedamr Masech Sota, Bima Shel Eitz, Osimlo, Zarah, they would make a bima of wood in the Zarah, Va'anu Korin Oto, Alhambra, and according to Rashi in Old French, it would be called an Alhambra. V'hayu osinoso. Well, why would they make it, and why is it prohibited? So Rashi tells us because they would make it lidchof misham ish lamito. Again, they would create this as a structure off of which they would throw people. All of these things create injury for the public. Yisrael Sham, and we don't want any Jew to, God forbid, end up being caught in these structures. Usher livnos imayin. If they want to build it, hey, they could build it for themselves. But we aren't going to help them because that would be facilitating doing bad things for the public. And so actually this question of what we can do for the public and whether there's harm, Rav Chagai Reznikov from Yeshiva Chovevei Torah has used this to argue that this is why pollution actually and other things that cause harm to the public are also going to be prohibited. And the question is just how far do you go? So whereas releasing some kind of gas that would actually harm people is clearly covered by this, do we say that the long-term harm associated with pollution would also be covered by this? But that's a separate question, but it's an argument that he makes based on this Mishnah. You have a question? Go ahead.
So
Wayne.
when do we get the balance between somebody who's parnasah is to sell and needs to sell to a non-Jewish community, and the other side that says, well, we can't sell to them because they're going to use this to kill or to hurt people? Where do you draw the line as what's allowed and what's not allowed?
So it's an excellent question, and basically what we see is other than with respect to things that everybody needs, like food, we do not generally say that, well, then it's for parnasa, it's okay. Meaning, so that's, and then with respect to everything else, what we say is, the question is does it cause harm? And can it be used to kill, essentially? And so if the answer is it causes harm and it can be used to kill, or it would be used to kill, so then it would be prohibited. And we would not say, well, you need to, because that's how your parnasa is, you're a builder, you have to take what comes through the door. No, you do not have to take what comes through the door. You need, if worse comes to worse, it's way better for you to go around and ask people that you need support than to engage in the building of a structure that is going to be used negatively. Aval bonim bimusios Ubeis marchatzaos. Now, this is remarkable, what we're about to say, because you're allowed to build. Rashi says that it's a bimusios is an altar, ubeis marchatzaos, and you're allowed to build bathhouses. So this is really quite remarkable. Rashi says, one second, do we have that, Rashi? Bemusaos Garcin. So take a look, second of the wide lines in Rashi. Bemusaos Garcinan. That's the word is musios. Bimusios. So binyan she'enu l'tzorach avodas kochavim. It's a building that does not directly serve idolaters. Umifarish l'kaman, and we're going to explain it in a moment. Parak Rabbi Yishmael, down on Daf Nun Gimel and Bet. V'korin lo altar, and it's called an altar. The Ketani b'misaos shall ovdei kochavim mutarin, that you're allowed to make an altar for Avodah Zarah. Umay bimus. Bima, and bimus, the word root to it is a platform. Shall Evan of a stone, achat of one stone, umakriv zvachim, and on it sacrifices would be built. Tahabi tashmish to tashmish lavodas kochavim, because although the altar is used as a base for the sacrifices, it itself is not part of the worship, and therefore, even as long as it's not part of the worship, we can actually make the base on which the sacrifices would be sacrificed. It's shocking. I would not have thought that would be the case. And we can make bathhouses, notwithstanding the fact that a lot of bad things happen in bathhouses. They're not themselves structures for idolatry or murder, and therefore we're not going to prohibit them. Higia lekipa, however, shema'amidim ba avodas kochavim, when it comes to in those structures, the niche in which you would actually set up the idol, that you shouldn't build, because that is purposely for the idol itself. It's not for the sacrifice which then serves the idol, it's for the idol itself. So as a result, that's going to be prohibited. Asur livnos, that you can't build for them. All right, so that's the background. And so now, having mentioned certain animals, we're going to now discuss a rule that we're going to discuss, well, what about we're going to discuss what's the rule about large wild animals in general. We had in our Mishnah, we had the examples of a lion and a bear, but that could be understood to imply, a large deer, which doesn't have that same dangers, maybe you would be able to sell. So we're going to see that in a moment. But in order to understand this Gemara, we need a little bit of background. And the background is the following. An animal must be alive when slaughtered to be kosher. Okay, that's pretty clear. But how do we know? How do we know that the animal was sufficiently alive when it was slaughtered? And so it needs to engage in a behavior referred to as pirchus. It has to have this jerking post the slaughtering after you cut the relevant pieces. You do the and so it needs to move around. Now, the movement that's necessary depends on whether it's a big animal or a little animal. A big animal just needs to put out its leg. It just needs to go out. A small animal needs to have both an outward motion and an inward motion. So it needs to go out and in. Now, the question that we're going to discuss right now is, what about a large wild animal? Does a large wild animal need an outward and inward motion like a small domesticated animal? Or does it need just the outward motion of a large domesticated animal. That's what we're about to discuss. So Amar Rav Chanan bar Rav Chisda v'Amri la Amar Rav Chanan bar Rava. So it's either Rav Chanan or Rav Chanin. Amar Rav, they said in the name of Rav, Chaya Gasa Harehi Kibehema Daka Lefirkus. A large wild animal is like a small domesticated animal when it comes to this pirkus, when it comes to this movement. It needs to go out and in. Avalola Mechira. But when it comes to selling, a large wild animal is not like a small domesticated animal. Remember, a small domesticated animal we can sell in places where the custom is to sell, and we don't sell in places where the custom is not to sell. V'ani omer, but Rav Chanan or Rav Chanan says, I disagree with Rav. And af l'mechira, I say even when it comes to selling a large wild animal, it's like the selling of a small domesticated animal, and therefore in places where the custom is to allow it, you're allowed to do so. Makom shenago limkor mokrin, shelo limkor ein mokrin. In places where the custom is to sell, you can sell, and where it isn't, you can't. And Tanan. So now we're going to try to support Rav Chanan / Rav Chanan's position and say our Mishnah is proof. Because what did we say? Ein mokrin lehen dubin v'arayos. You can't sell lions and bears and lions below kol davar sheyesh bo nezek l'rabim, anything else that creates harm to the public. Taima to isbe nezek l'rabim. The reason is because it causes injury to the public. Haleis ben nezek l'rabim shari. If it didn't cause injury, it would be permitted. And so presumably these other wild animals don't cause injury to the public and therefore are going to be permitted. So Amar Rabba bar Ula ba'ari shavur. No, what we're talking about in our Mishnah is even a broken lion is what is the implication. Don't think that when we say you can't sell a lion, but because it does harm, that what you can sell are other large wild animals. No. What we're trying to highlight with respect to the lion is that if the lion is actually broken, meaning that it can't do any kind of harm, well, then you're going to be able to sell it. And Va'aliba to Rabbi Yehuda, and our Mishnah would follow Rabbi Yehuda. Remember, Rabbi Yehuda is the one who says a maimed animal, a maimed large animal can be sold. And so that's just consistent with Rabbi Yehuda. And what does that mean? It means that Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis would all agree that with respect to a large wild animal, you would not be able to sell it. And so as a result, this is not a proof to Rav Chanan and Rav Chanan. And Rav Ashi says you don't even have to go that far. You could say, Stam Ari Shavorhu Eitza Malacha. A regular animal is maimed when it comes to work. Because what was our concern, according to Rabbi Yehuda? Our concern is that a person is going to keep the animal. And so the point is that if the animal is actually not dangerous, and so as a result, it's going to be slaughtered immediately, and it's going to therefore not going to be a problem, even though it isn't maimed. Meaning, according to Rav Ashi, our Mishnah is saying, yes, you cannot sell a healthy lion that is going to do damage. But what you can sell is a healthy tamed lion that is not going to do damage. And what is the person going to do with that tamed lion? They're going to kill it right away because they want the pelt, they want the whatever structure of the animal. And so as a result, you don't need to worry about it because it's not going to be fierce, it's not going to serve any purpose, and it's definitely not going to be used in the stadium in order to fight with people because it's tamed, exactly. So Meisvei, 1 second, I'll ask you a question. So now we're going to we first tried to prove that Rav Chanan was correct, that you can sell a large wild animal just like you can sell a small domesticated animal. Now we're going to prove the opposite direction and say that Rav Chanan is completely wrong. Kashem she'ein mokrin lahem, because we have a brisa. Kashem she'ein mokrin lahem behem agasa. Just as we don't sell large domesticated animals, kach ein mokrin lahem chaya gasa. We don't sell large wild animals to idol worshippers. And even in a place where you do sell the small domesticated animals, chaya gasa, a large wild animal, ein mokrin lehen, we don't sell. So that is Teyufta to Rav Chanan bar Rava Teyufta. This is a complete upslug of Rav Chanan / Rav Chanan, and therefore we have shown that he is incorrect. And in fact, Rav's position is correct, namely that a large wild animal is like a small domesticated animal with respect to pirchus, but not with respect to selling. And when it comes to selling, just as you can't sell a large domesticated animal to a non-Jew, you cannot sell a large wild animal. Ravina Rami Masnisan Abraisa Mishani. Ravina came to the same conclusion based on the apparent disagreement between the Baraisa that we just quoted and our Mishnah. How did that go? Tanan, we have in our Mishnah, Ein Mokrin Lahen Dubin Barayas Velo Kol Davar Sheyesh Bo Nezek Larabim Taima Deis Ba Nezek Hales Ba Nezek Mokrin. So in second, our Mishnah implies that if you have a large wild animal that doesn't do damage, you're allowed to sell it. Uraminu, but in second, I have another Brisa that we just quoted, Kishem She'ein Mokrin Behema Gasa Kach Ein Mokrin that you're not allowed to sell a large wild animal, even in a place where you are allowed to sell small domesticated animals, you're not allowed to sell. So how in one place does it imply that a large wild animal is permitted to be sold, and in another place it's clear that a large wild animal is not permitted to sell? Umeshani, and he answered, Ba'ari Shavor, what's allowed to be sold is a broken lion, and according to Rabbi Yehuda. And Rav Ashi Amar, no, Stam Ari Shavorhu Eitzel Malacha. No, it doesn't have to literally be broken. We treat it as broken because no lion is ever going to do work for you. And so as a result, if it's tamed, you don't have to worry about it. And that position is just Rabbi Yehuda. Again, and again, the rabbis would say, and everybody would say, that when it comes to large wild animals, you cannot sell it. So Maskif lo Rav Nachman asked the question, Man lema da'ari chaya gasahi. How do you know that a lion is considered a large animal? Meaning the implication of what we said is that a lion is a large animal. Maybe it's a small animal. And Rashi suggests here by saying that this lion is maybe a small animal. Maybe this lion is just a baby. Maybe this lion happens to be the runt of the litter. So, but it doesn't make a difference because you know what? The proof is still a valid proof. Rav Ashi Dayak Masnisin. Listen to our Mishnah, and you can see that it undermines the position of Rav Chanan bar Rava, and the undermining of the position of Rav Chanan bar Rava tells us that, you know what? It doesn't matter what the lion's considered, because any kind of large wild animal is going to be prohibited. Mosiv Tiyuvta Tanan. So our Mishnah says you can't sell lions and bears. V'lo kol davar sheyesh bo nezek l'rabim, or anything that creates injury. Taima de'is ba nezek, hales ba nezek mokrin. Taima ari. But 1 second, the reason is that we specifically mentioned a lion. The stam ari shavor heitzel malacha. The point of referencing the lion is not because of the danger that it caused, but because a lion specifically is an animal that could never do work. Oh, and a lion will never do work for you. And presumably the same thing is true for a bear. You're never going to train it to do any kind of work for you. So aval midi achrina da'aben malacha lo. But what we're trying to say is that when it comes to other things that can do work, you would be allowed to sell. So again, to Yuvta, the Rav Chanan bar Rava. So again, this is a contradiction to I'm sorry, when it comes to Avalmidi, to Achrina, to Abin Malacha, but when it comes to anything else that could do work, meaning all other wild animals, you wouldn't even have the Hava Amina of saying that it would be permitted. The only reason that the lion and the bear are permitted is because you would think that they would be permitted to sell because they could never do work for you. But because they're dangerous, that's why we say that they can't be sold. But really, all large animals, all wild animals are not going to be able to be sold, even if they could do work, because if they could do work, well, then you would keep them, and then people would learn that maybe you could sell a large animal to a non-Jew. So as a result, Tiyufta to Rav Chanan bar Rava Tiyufta. We have contradicted Rav Chanan bar Rava. So v'chaya gasa mias my malacha avda. Well, 1 second. What kind of work can a large wild animal do? So Amar Abaye, Amar Le, Mar Yehuda, Debei, Mar Yochani, Tachani Rechayim Ba'arode. That an arode, a wild donkey, a wild ass, would be used in his house in order to turn the grindstone. And so therefore, that's what we're talking about. Okay, so Amar Rav Zera ki Avinan Bey Rav Yehuda Amar Lan Gemiru Minai Hamilsa. So when we came to he was at Rav Yehuda's yeshiva, he said, learn from me this following thing. The Megaver Rabba Shmuel. I heard it from a great person. V'lo yadana imi Rav imi Shmuel. But I don't remember whether I learned it from Rav or Shmuel. Chaya Gasa Harei Hi Gebehem Adaka Lapirkos. That just as we saw the statement in the name of Rav earlier, that statement is now being said possibly in the name of Rav, possibly in the name of Shmuel. And the statement is that when it comes to a large wild animal, it needs to, if you're slaughtering it for shechita, it needs to have both the outward motion and the inward motion, just like a small domesticated animal. Kiyase lekorkuna kunya, when Zera got to korkunya, ashkchte the Rav Chia bar Ashi, he saw Rav Chia bar Ashi. V'yosef v'ka'amar v'mishmei de Shmuel, and he said in the name of Shmuel, Chaya Gasa harei hi kebehem agdaka lepurkos. Oh, it's a large wild animal is like a small domesticated animal with respect to pirkos, with respect to the movement that it needs to make. Amina shmamina and mishmei de Shmuel itmar. Oh, must be that when Rav Yehuda heard this, he heard it from, when Rav Yehuda was teaching this matter, he said it was in the name of Shmuel. Kiyasel Surah, but when he got to Surah, Ashkechel Rabba Bar Yirmiyah, he saw Rabba Bar Yirmiyah, to Yosef Amrle Mishmei de Rav, and he said in the name of Rav, Chaya Gasa Hare Hikabehim Agdaka Keperkos. Then no, it's a large wild animal is like a small domesticated animal, and I heard that in the name of Rav. So Amina Shmamina, Idmar Mishmei de Rav, Idmar Mishmei de Shmuel. So it was said in the name of both of them. And Ki, Salkis, Lahasam, and when I eventually got to Eretz Yisrael, Ashkachte, L'Rav Asi, I met Rav Asi, to Yosef Amar Rav Chama Bar Guria, Mishmei de Rav, Chayagasa, Harei Hike Behema Daka Lapirkos. Again, now it was in the name of Rav, but he added that it was actually Rav Chama Bar Guria who said it in the name of Rav. So Amrile, I told him, the lo savar lar mar, deman mara, dishmaita, Rabba Bar Yirmiyah. Well, 1 second. Wasn't Rabba Bar Yirmiyah the one who said it in the name of Rav, not Rabbi Chama Bar Guria? So Amar Li, Pasya Uchma, you know what? You are a black pot. You have spent a lot of time in the Beit Midrash, and Rashi explains that you spend a lot of time in the Beit Midrash. Therefore, your clothing is all black because you don't spend any time doing laundry, and this is meant to be a compliment. And so, as a result, Minayu Minach Tistayim Shmaita, using our two comments together, we can learn something. And therefore, Itmar Nami, and that's why it was said, Amar Rabbi Zera. What did Rabbi Zera say? How was it in the end taught? Amar Rabbi Asi, Amar Rabba Bar Yirmiyah, Amar Rav Chama Bar Guria, Amar Rab. That the tradition was, it went from Rabbi Zera said, he heard it from Rav Asi, who heard it from Rabba Bar Yirmiyah, who heard it from Rabba Bar Guria, who heard it from Rav. Chaya Gasa Harehi Gebehema Daka Lapirkos. And in fact, a large domestic, not a large wild animal, is treated like a small domesticated animal when it comes to moving around. So that brings us, my apologies for not scrolling, that brings us to the discussion of the buildings that we cannot help idolaters build. But for that discussion, stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. I wish you a Shabbat Shalom. Have a wonderful Shabbos. We'll pick up from there. Motzi Shabbos will presumably be on Zoom, Motzi Shabbos, and Sunday as well. Monday has already been recorded. So if you go to the website, you can actually already get that one. And that's the story. Look forward to continuing our learning together.
Story.
I'll see you. I'll be back on Wednesday. Looking forward to continuing our learning.